Good morning, church. I am super excited to be with you guys because you guys get the better run. I already got all the kinks out in the first service. I'm going to embarrass my parents. They're right over there, so say hi to them now. Yeah. They raised me, so, they're super close to God. I am so excited to be with you guys. We're going to keep going with the series, the gospel movement that you guys have been going through here. We're going to be camped out in Acts 10, so if you want to grab the Bibles that are in front of you, the ones you brought with you, it's going to be about page 891 or thereabouts. And while you guys are turning there, I'm going to tell you guys a cool story. So in 1992, Michael Weiser and his wife and their 5 children moved to Lincoln, Nebraska to take over the leadership of the local Jewish synagogue, right? Took a position there as their leader. Not 5 days after they moved in, they get a phone call. And on the other end, a rough voice says, "We'll be watching you, scum." Right? And then just hangs up. And so a few days later, he gets a package on his doorstep that's filled with just anti-Jew and anti-black literature, just filled with hate. And there's a card that says, "You'll be sorry you moved here, Jew boy," the KKK. And so this is the first in a laundry list of things that Larry Trapp did to instill fear in Michael Weiser and his family. Larry Trapp is the grand dragon of the KKK. So basically the governor of racism for Nebraska, singled out Michael Weiser and his family and just tried to fill him with fear, fill him with hate. And rather than taking that fear and running away from it for the safety of his kids and family, like most of us would, and rather than taking that fear and getting mad and fighting Larry Trapp, like a lot more of us probably would, he took a different approach. He took a more proactive approach of love. And so Michael Weiser got Larry Trapp's phone number and started calling him once a week and leaving messages on his phone. And he would pick up the phone and Larry Trapp would answer. Michael Weiser would say, "There's a lot of love in the world, Larry. You're not getting it. Do you need some?" And then he would hang up again. So they had this little game of phone tag, love and hate. And so this went on for months. Months and months and months of just once a week going back and forth. He would say, "I love you," and he would say, "I hate you." So much so that Michael Weiser's wife actually got involved and called Larry Trapp because Larry Trapp was disabled. He was in a wheelchair, and he didn't know how to get here. He couldn't get anywhere, so Michael Weiser's wife would offer to drive him to the grocery store and to run errands and do things out of love. And he would shut her down, obviously. This went on for months. Months and months with no end in sight. He still was the leader of the flag. Until one day, Michael Weiser got another phone call. And this time it was quiet. He picked up the phone. There wasn't things about Jew boy and scum and hate. It was just quiet. Until Larry Trapp finally spoke and said, "I want to get out of what I'm doing, but I don't know how." He finally reached the end of his rope, finally reached the bottom of the well of hate he had, and Michael Weiser had been there the whole way down. So Michael invited him over to his house, and they ate and drank and talked about life and God and love and race and color and all these things. And it came to a point in the conversation where Michael and his wife actually asked Larry Trapp to move into their home. And they became his caretakers. They moved him into a spare bedroom. They became his caretakers. They reached into his hate. It wasn't like it was easy. They just reached in and said, "I love you anyway." Larry Trapp renounced the KKK and sat under Michael Weiser and converted to Judaism, sat under him until his death a year later. Michael Weiser exhibited the gospel movement I want to talk about today. And that is one of reckless and unabandoned, without borders, without questions, love for God and his people. So we're going to take Acts 10. We're going to walk through this passage as an example, a biblical example of what it looks like for us today. So I'm going to make a few points along the way. So if you're a note taker, get excited. It's pretty organized. I've got 3 points. And so the title of this message is called Messages from Joppa. Why Joppa, you ask? See you later. It's a teaser. So let's dig into the story. In Acts 10, we meet a man named Cornelius, right? It says he's part of the Italian cohort, which basically means he's part of the Roman army, a centurion. But a little history lesson for you, the Italian cohort was very different from the other Roman army in the fact that he volunteered. Most people got drafted, or it was a family business, or they owed a debt, so they would pledge allegiance to Caesar. He volunteered, which means He was most loyal to Caesar, which also means he was most hated by the Jewish community in the area, because Jews and Caesar kind of didn't really get along at that point. But it wasn't just that he's a centurion, a part of the atomic cohort. If you read a little bit down further, it says that you'll see this word, a God-fearer. And what that means is that somewhere in his travels as a centurion or in life, he had come across the God of Israel. And he had seen what they were doing, and he had learned to love and worship him. But he didn't convert to full Judaism. So he didn't get circumcised. He didn't eat the kind of diet they had. But they were aimed at the same direction. They were pointed at the God of Israel. So we pick up the story in verse 3, and it'll be on the screen so you guys can read in your Bible. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God come in and say to him, Cornelius. And he stared at him in terror and said, What is it, Lord? And he said to him, Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa and bring one Simon, who's called Peter. He's lodging with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. When the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier from among them who attended him. And having related everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. See, messages from Joppa. Yeah. All right, we're going to pause there. So Cornelius, he's living a good life, right? By all accounts, he's doing what he should be doing. He's a God-fearer. He's praying, giving alms, right? He's doing everything that a good person should be doing. But I want you guys to notice something. It isn't enough, right? God intervened in a vision to say, go bring Peter. God would not correct Cornelius' life if it didn't need correcting. Cornelius needed something he didn't even know he needed. And he didn't even know who Peter was, right? It says that he was said to go call on Simon called Peter. And the historians probably say that it's because he didn't know who Peter was. He had to give him a surname, a Simon called Peter. And what I want you guys to notice on this is that God intervened for a specific purpose. Cornelius was living a good life, but he still needed the gospel. He still needed Peter. He was doing everything right, but he was still missing a key component. Which brings me to my first point. Good people still need Jesus. Right? Cornelius is doing everything good. He's walking the straight and narrow, but he's still missing Jesus. Right? Lots of us know moral people, good people who, by all accounts, they're living a good life. They're, nothing's going on. Maybe they're even in church, and if they're sitting next to you, don't look at them. So, if they're living the good life, I find in my own personal walk with God, it's super hard to talk to those people, right? Because when there's a tragedy, it's very easy to bring God into that conversation, right? If they're addicted to drugs, God is going to be your peace. God is going to be your joy. If they're experiencing a tragedy, God will lean on God's understanding. His ways are not your ways. It's easy to point to God in the tragedy and in trials. It's not so much when they're living a good life. Like, how do you tell people they're lacking something when they don't feel like they're lacking anything? And something I struggled with this for a very long time until I want to share with you guys what one of my seminary professors shared with me. And it changed my perspective on what I thought about these good people living in my life. It says in the Bible that all fall short. We can't miss that biblical truth. So my professor says, everyone who doesn't know Jesus, from the worst serial killer on death row to the best person you know, is going to hell. They are already in the worst possible situation they could be in. We have all fallen short. Without Jesus, there is no middle ground. So these good people, these Corneliuses, still need Jesus. They're living a good life, but God still had to intervene to bring salvation through Jesus Christ. The Bible says that to get saved, to accept Jesus, we need to confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. So to do that, the gospel, that's not just going to fall down on the street for you. You need someone to bring you the gospel, which brings us to the next part of the story. Enter Peter. So look down in verse 9. We see that Peter is praying, but he's hungry, dinner is almost ready, he's starving, and he falls into a trance, a vision very similar to Cornelius. And in there's this sheet that comes down, and he sees all these animals, right? So if Peter's hungry, all he can focus on is food. So the sheet comes down, and there's everything in it: horses, cows, giraffes, pigs, lobster, crab. Like, this is the original pigs in a blanket. So if you want the recipe, it's right here. So he sees this. And this voice of God says, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter says, by no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. That's when the voice speaks again. And I want you guys to catch this, because this is the point I'm talking about today. What God has made clean, do not call common. And as usual for Peter, it happens 3 more times and he still doesn't get it. So he's having this vision, and then those messengers that we talked about, they were coming down to Joppa. They talk to Peter. They finally knock on the door, and they explain why they're there. They say, Cornelius, a centurion, an upright, God-fearing man, who is well spoken of by the whole Jewish nation, was directed by the holy angel to send for you to come to his house and hear what you have to say. Right? So Peter goes with him. He doesn't quite understand the vision. It's happened a few times, and now he's got these people. He's like, okay, I'm trying to understand it. So he goes with him. But it is not just Cornelius at Cornelius' house, right? They say he wants to hear what God has to say through Peter. So Cornelius invites everyone, like mom, dad, crazy Uncle Joe, that guy at your family reunion who's you're not really sure how he relates to everyone, neighbor that borrowed your lawnmower and never gave it back. All of them, they're all there. The people are just packed in this house to hear what God has to say, right? And it's only then that Peter's vision becomes clear. And he says, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew, Peter, to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So I was sent for, they came without objection. I asked them why you send for me. So this is the second part of that story I want to make, the point I want to make. The second point is cultural preferences run deep. The best research we have kind of suggests that this event happened 10 years after Pentecost, right? Little history lesson. Peter preaches at Pentecost. Jesus died, rose from the dead. In him is salvation, right? Holy Spirit comes down. You guys covered this before. This is a decade later. Peter had every opportunity to talk to Gentiles and bring them to Christ, but he didn't. Because in his mind, it was only Jews, right? It took an act of God to show him the greater plan for salvation. So when Peter gets that vision for the animals, he recognizes the authority. He says, by no means, Lord. So he recognizes this is God talking to him, and now he's recognizing that these are the people that he's talking about, but he still says by no means. And most of us today are like, come on, Peter, dude, we've been through this. You don't deny Jesus. 3 times now? But what we don't understand is that for 1,500 years, Jews had been told to eat something unclean was a sin against God. It says in Leviticus 11, anything with a cloven hoof, the kind of hoofs that pigs have, is unclean. And this isn't some kind of like haphazard tradition or some paleo whatever quinoa diet. This isn't a command from God. He's saying there in Jewish culture, there are 2 kinds of things, clean and unclean, common and sacred. So to eat something unclean meant it wasn't sacred. And if it's not sacred, it's against God. So this isn't just some diet. This is God telling the Jews of Israel saying, if you eat pigs, if you eat shellfish, you eat things that are unclean, you don't care about holiness. You don't care about me. You don't care about what you say you believe. This is not just some diet. This is a command. It's as important as our command to love our neighbors as ourselves with all our hearts, souls, minds. This is the exact same thing. And so he wasn't trying to be disobedient. He was just doing what he thought was right, doing what any good Jew would do. But now God is showing him that I know what you believe, but in the new covenant of Jesus Christ, it doesn't matter, right? So his preferences for how we should eat don't matter. It's gone. And the way this relates to a lot of us today is that we claim we want a Revelation 7 kind of church. If you're not familiar with the passage, it's the end times. Jesus is on his throne, he's already ascended, and it's every tribe, nation, and tongue worshiping him, right? So a whole bunch of kind of people. And so to explain that and how this relates to the sermon, I'm actually going to teach you guys a new word. So if you don't like my message, you can at least say you learned something. A little Snapple sermon. So the word is actually multiculturalism. It's going to be up on the screen. We're going to break it down. Okay? So the word is multiculturalism. It breaks down into 3 parts. The first part is multi. It means many, like a lot. The second part is culture. It means a way of life, a way of doing things, a custom. And ism is a little suffix on the end That means it's an ideology or a philosophy of life, a way to do things by. So all together, this means that we want one way of life that includes many other ways of life, right? We want a Revelation 7 church. We want one God who we're worshiping that includes many different kinds of tribes, nations, tongues, right? So we say this. We say we want this, and it's a big hot button in church today because most churches say, I want people who are from different races, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic statuses, rich people, poor people. We want everyone, right? Everyone should come to Jesus. It's a beautiful Revelation 7 kind of thing, but if I'm honest, I find in churches today, my own heart and all of our hearts, we don't really want a multicultural church. We just want a multicolored church. We don't want a multicultural church. We just want a multi-generational church. We want people from different backgrounds, but we want them to think and act like us. We want them to fit into this little mold that we have that, oh no, this is how Christians act, right? I'm glad they're from the hood and from the ghetto, but that rap music, that's not Christian. Or this young couple that's coming to church, we love them, but their traditions are so much different from us. Or things like that. Things that exclude people from the gospel, because apparently, like with the ideas that we have, you can come see Jesus, but you got to leave your baggage at the door, right? And so, I kind of have a truth for you guys. I don't know if you know this, but people from different demographics are going to be different from you. Like it's just it's a thing that's in there, in the DNA of what it is. You can see this in like age groups, like a 14-year-old, vastly different from a 30-year-old. Can I get an amen from the parents? Yeah? Right? People are just different. 15-year-olds, they might grow up in the same area, the same culture, the same socioeconomic status, but they're going to be different from their parents. It's just how culture works. But don't call common what God has called clean. Do not disgrace what God has already extended grace to, right? If you're using terms like those people or them, or if you have these quiet judgments in your heart when people come in the door that you never really say out loud, you're saying that Jesus wasn't, like the cross was not enough. And I think this comes from the idea that we forget we were those people. At one point in our life, we were those people looking in on God's love. Someone, somewhere, whether it was your parent as a child, or a friend who led you to Christ, or maybe you just found God on the side of a road in the Gideon's Bible, someone overcame their preferences for you. Someone said, Josh, really don't like the way you're dressed right now, but I really want you to know the love God has for you. Someone overcame those preferences. Which leads me to my third and final point. The gospel doesn't recognize borders. Culturally, or even physically, the gospel goes everywhere. The former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Abraham Kuyper, says this about Jesus and his gospel. There is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry mine. There is not a thing we can think of, imagine, contemplate, see, nothing, real or imaginary, where Christ doesn't say, that's mine. And that's what Peter is realizing, right? And so when he comes to Cornelius and his family in verse 34, he recognizes this, and he starts the gospel saying, truly, I understand God shows no partiality. But in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. Right? He recognizes that God is crying mine over the first true Gentiles in the world. The first people who Peter had these preferences and said, you can be a God-fearer, but this Judaism, not Christ, not really for you. God says mine. God says, I want Cornelius, specifically him, by name, the way he cries mine over us. The way he cries mine over Josh, Bill, Kyle. He says mine. And so, Peter gives him the gospel. He recognizes that God is crying mine. And he gives him the story of Jesus Christ and what he did for him on the cross. And the Holy Spirit falls on the Gentiles, and they begin to speak in tongues, praising God, saying thank you. And when Peter leaves, he goes to the church in Jerusalem, because like all of us, a lot of us, we're all part of a church. He goes to tell them the story and be like, hey, you remember how we thought it was Jesus was just for the Jews? Nah, he's got actually plans for the Gentiles and all these other people too. And like Peter, they had preferences. They had borders. And they accused him, rather than believing in what happened, they say, you shouldn't have been eating with the Gentiles. What are you even doing, right? They accuse him. And so Peter tells them the story. And he tells them the story about how he gave him the gospel. And at the end of it, he says, it was just like us when we first heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. So who am I to stand in God's way? Peter is telling these faithful people, these good Jews, it's not like they were doing bad things. It's not like they were Pharisees being legalistic. They just thought they knew what God wanted. And Peter's telling them, no. There's a bigger picture here. The Gentiles were just like we were. I had this circle about who could come in to Christianity, about who could accept Jesus. It turns out the Gentiles they're standing in the same circle. It's so much bigger than Peter thought, and the Jerusalem church accepts them. And that even though the church and Peter didn't prefer Gentiles, it's not like it overcame hundreds of years of racism. They accepted that God's plan is more important than our borders. So when we seek a multicultural church with people who are beautifully different from us, we fulfill the great commandment to go into all nations and preach the gospel, the good news that Jesus died for all sinners. And I'm not saying this is easy. It's actually very hard, right? Because we prefer our preferences. We want to be in an easy environment. Most people don't willingly say, I want to do hard things. I want to be in a place that's uncomfortable. But that's not what Jesus is calling us for. He didn't say, come to church, have a seat, and be comfortable. Have an easy life. He says, go. Go and preach. Go and tell them. And so when we find people who are different from us, it might be easier to find people who are the same, but it doesn't make us better. I have blind spots, things that I struggle with, things that you're probably really strong in. If we just have a whole circle of people who are just like me, it's going to be really good looking. But it's also going to have a lot of weaknesses, right? It's going to have these glaring blind spots. Things that I will never be able to overcome unless Tim tells me, hey Kyle, you're actually kind of callous lately towards people. You should love a little bit harder. I don't have people like Sam telling me that my problem with prayer life, that's just me being lazy. And so there's this old phrase for people who think that we should only have a church with the same people in the circle. It says that if two people are exactly alike, one of them is unnecessary. We already have that guy. We don't need another one. We don't need a copy and paste. So we need to have a relational attitude towards people to get multiculturalism right. And so I'm going to give you guys a telltale sign of multiculturalism. If you're doing good in your church to reaching out to people, if you're doing good in your own life, it's uncomfortable. It's awkward. Because we're not the same, right? I love teenagers. I'm going to talk tonight at the youth group about why I love teenagers and why I love youth and why I think their generation, not mine, is going to be the one that changes everything. However, they talk to me about these rappers and people that I have no clue about. I'm lost. They're different. It's awkward because I grew up on Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana. Yeah, see? One guy. We grew up differently, right? They're different from me. But I recognize that what Christ did on the cross is more important than our music, more important than our age. It doesn't matter if you are black, white, zebra striped, or polka dots, if you are 112 or you were born yesterday. Our love for God and our love for what Christ did on the cross overcomes it all. Our preferences don't matter in light of what Jesus did for us. Yeah, amen. See? Yeah. So if you're feeling uncomfortable in your church, if you're feeling uncomfortable in the way you talk to people, you're doing multiculturalism right. You are fulfilling that Revelation 7 kind of vision to say, yeah, you and I don't always get along, But we love Jesus, and that's enough. This is the sheet that comes down and covers all of us. 800 years before Cornelius and Peter, there was another messenger in Joppa. His name was Jonah. Jonah had the same message to go preach to the Gentiles, but he let his preferences, his circle of what was acceptable to God, overcome everything. He was so bitter against the Ninevites. And it wasn't like it was unfounded. The Ninevites were what we thought of Middle Eastern people right after 9/11, with just hatred for what a culture or a person did to their nation. It wasn't unfounded. But Jonah missed the message. Not the message for the Ninevites. The Ninevites got that message. They repented. Jonah missed the message for Jonah. The message that says God's ultimate plan is for all of us to come under his authority and worship him for who he truly is. Right? He missed that message. He missed a great gospel message. Fast forward nearly a millennium, and Peter gets that same message. The same message to go preach to the Gentiles. But Simon Bar-Jonah, Peter's full original name, Christ called Peter, he overcame those preferences and realized God shows no partiality. God doesn't have a dividing line. God doesn't have a circle. God doesn't have things that keep people from Christ. Today we are in Joppa, you and me, all of us. We are in Joppa, and not 20 miles from here are cities and towns and communities and schools of people who don't know Jesus. And it's so hard to overcome our preferences. But what does that say about when we accepted Jesus, we accepted his overcoming of his own preferences for us. And we're saying, no, Jesus, you're not enough for what this person did. But Jesus says, all have fallen short, but I died for everyone. And like I said, it's uncomfortable. It's awkward. A few weeks ago, or maybe a month or two ago, I had the privilege and honor of leading a woman to Christ. Her name is Sheila Baker. And Sheila Baker is a 42-year-old black woman who struggles with same-sex attraction. Her and I have nothing in common. But she backed into my roommate's car, and we had a nice little accident, and I came out, and she was sobbing. And rather than overcoming my preference to be angry at an accident, I asked her what's wrong. And we got to talking. We talked about her struggles and how the church had hurt her and told her that she was never good enough. We got to talking about life and mistakes and Jesus and what forgiveness really means. And I had the honor and privilege of leading her to Christ. And so today, as you and I are in Joppa, we have the opportunity to take that same message out. And it isn't just for the Ninevites. It isn't just for Canandaigua or Victor or wherever you want to be in the world. It's for us. Because the gospel transforms not just the people we tell it to, but ourselves. It changes what I think about when I think about Jesus. When I think about Jesus dying on the cross right now, I don't think about some kind of weird sentence in the Bible that maybe I don't quite understand. I think about Sheila. And I think about her crying that she had finally found rest. I think about an experience when I think about a person. So, we get to decide every day, today, tomorrow, until we go meet our Lord and Savior, how we want to take that message. Do we want to be bitter like Jonah and miss the message? Or do we want to be like Peter and realize God shows no partiality, shows nothing, doesn't care about what we think about other people? He says, I know what I think. Mine. Let's pray. Father God, you are great and holy and so worthy of our worship, Lord. Help us overcome our preferences and the circles we divide so that we can better show the world that we're a Revelation 7 kind of church. We want you to have all the glory because we're all different. You are not colorblind. You recognize every beautiful difference in all of us. And you say, mine, I love you. I desperately and recklessly love you more than anything you think, more than any preference you have, more than what the church has hurt you, more than your own thoughts about yourself. Mine, I love you more. Lord, convict us of that love. Convict it in our hearts so that we can see other people. Lord, give us your eyes for just 1 second so that we can see people the way you do. We can see them as just needing you. Lord, bring us that kind of thought, that kind of feeling. Help us not to miss the message. Not the message for the Ninevites, and not the message for Canandaigua, and not the message for Victor, but the message for us. Help us to know that you love us more than your own preferences. You overcome just because of your great love for us. Lord, I love you and glorify you today. In Jesus' name, amen.